Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network for 10 years. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host here on Beer Sessions Radio. We've been doing this weekly for 13 years now, for a long time out of the studio at Roberta's Pizza in Bushwick, and since the pandemic, quite often online. So one benefit of that is we get to talk to friends from around the country and around the world. And two great folk who had lived in Brooklyn for a long time are now in Massachusetts, and we're able to talk via the online internet. So again, I'm Jimmy, and this is our show, Beer Sessions Radio, thanks to heritageradionetwork.org. Support and become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. So let's go around the room. We're going to introduce our guests. Mike.
Sure. I'm Mike DeLaquila. I'm the co-founder of Hot Plate Brewing Company.
All right. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Rael. I am the owner and brewer at Hot Plate Brewing Company.
Okay. So a couple weeks ago, I got a really great email from you guys. It said, wow, we listened to the episode with Chris and Yahira at Bierwax and Kevin and Kim of Harlem Hops, and you wanted to introduce yourself. So I did some research. I talked to Chris Maestro at Bierwax, and he says, yes, they were great customers for a long time at the bar, and can't wait to find out what they're doing at Hot Plate Brewing. So, Sarah, let's start with your backstory. You know, a little bit about you, how you got interested in beer, maybe some of the first beer styles that you made as a home brewer, things that inspired you to take it all this way to now opening a brewery in Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Sure. I have been a beer lover since basically I was able to legally drink. I am very much a rule follower. Except for maybe the Budweiser I had on a trip to London in high school. So great choice if I'm overseas. And what was great is that I did both my undergrad and my graduate at Penn State, where it's actually where Mike and I met. And they had a great bar there called Zeno's, and they had this thing called Around the World in 80 Beers. And it was this passport. They had, it was more like a professor bar. It wasn't exactly your dollar ice house pitchers type of place. And I saw the passport and looking back at that, I was like, wow, I had so many different beers that I didn't even know were amazing, basically. Wow. And so it was great because that kind of got me past the Bud Light life, just those very quantity over quality beers. And then as we were driving cross country from Penn State to California, we stopped at New Belgium. And that's kind of where everything hit for me. It was before they blew up. So it was this still small, tiny place, super close quarters for, your new best friends that were strangers a minute ago. And I was just like, I want to do this. But we had to use our degrees. So as I started traveling for work, more internationally, it can be very lonely to be in a country where you don't know the language. But to me, it was always, I could find a local pub or a brewery, and I found a lot of people just spoke the language of beer. So I've fell in love with English ales, and then obviously being able to go to Germany was amazing. And then once I kind of made the decision to start brewing, it was just what I was like, well, what do I like to make? What have I had that maybe I could add something a little bit different to that. So I believe Mike was the one who started homebrewing first. And then I started after him. I was like, but of course, like the student in me was like, I have to take all the classes. I have to learn. So actually, we lived around the corner from Bitter Nesters. So I took lessons with John LaPaul, and it was really great. And they're obviously super helpful. We still order a lot of our ingredients from them, all the way from Brooklyn. And so we just kind of started brewing what we wanted to drink. And for me, since I'll always die on the hill of ESBs, that was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that I could brew.
Wow, that's a great intro. But you're also like, you've had a career in like what, branding or marketing. I mean, you're very smart person.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, I've spent more than 16 years doing consumer insights for mostly kids and family networks. So Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, Nickelodeon, and various others. So yeah, I love research. I'm a nerd.
But we're a 21 and over show, just so you know that, just to make sure.
Yeah.
No kids content. No.
Exactly.
No kid imagery. No Santas on the cans, kids. But okay. So and Mike, for you, you have a role in this as well. So just tell us how you went from. So you were the home brewer, and Sarah, did she surpass you, or she was just more into it than you were?
Both are probably true. So when I got into it, Sarah was traveling a lot, like she said, internationally. And so I was like, you know what, I've always wanted it. I think both Sarah and I wanted to start brewing. And I think for a while we were like, how the hell are we going to brew in like a 600 square foot apartment? And then I started discovering those sort of 1 gallon kits you can get, where it gives you the steeping grains and the glass carboy you can use. And so you get basically all the ingredients in a little box. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me try this. And so what's funny is they give you a recipe and you can follow it fairly easily. And so if you follow all the instructions correctly, it usually comes out okay. And so I was like, oh, cool, I can make beer. Except that you don't really know the science or all of the different rules about brewing. So if you do make a mistake and you don't exactly know why or how you made a mistake, and it came out terribly, you're not exactly sure why. And it becomes sort of like frustrating and somewhat defeating. So I started getting kind of frustrated with the fact that it was hit or miss for me. And unlike Sarah, I was like, I'll just like read on the internet and like figure this out myself. And when Sarah started taking classes with John, her skill level increased obviously exponentially. And then I think the other thing was, not only did she help share that knowledge with me, but then when we started writing our own recipes, I was very like by the book. Like I would be like, here's a porter recipe. You'd get that. There's a book out there. I forgot who the author is, but it's basically like brewing 80 classic beer styles. It might have been John Palmer or someone like that. And they're all just basically right down the middle, like BJCP style beers. And so for me, it was like, okay, I'll just tinker with this a little bit. And Sarah would just be like, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Why don't I throw chamomile on a blonde ale? And I was just like, for me, it was very much like the German purity laws, the Reinheitsgebot. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. And so she started making these beers that I'm like, the proof was in the pudding. Like, wow, okay, like you have a knack for it. And she grew up cooking from probably too young of an age, to be honest. Her family owned a Mexican restaurant, and her grandmother was an incredible cook. And so once we got to the point where our technical knowledge was increasing, it becomes more about expression. And so I saw that she was, I think, just more inspired to play around in a way that I was just always, I think, more fearful of, what if this comes out wrong, or what if this just isn't good? And so she had better instincts, I think. And I think what was also helpful was that when we would serve the beers that she would make, not only would our friends have it and like it, but we used to have tasting parties at our condo. These were the pre-COVID times. And what would happen is the parties would be very gendered, where the guys would come over and drink beers and their significant others would, be polite, maybe take a sip. And she would make certain beers where even the women, and I hate this because obviously Sarah's on a mission to like not have this sort of gender wall of like, guys drink beer and women drink other drinks. But what would happen is they'd be like, oh, I've never had something like this before, or I really do like this. And so for me, it was like I knew that she was making good beer because we were drinking it ourselves and enjoying it. But when I saw other people really kind of hop on board and really like it and champion it as well, then I was like, okay, she really is onto something. I'm not just sort of like blinded by my love for her. Like it really is, that she's doing something good here. And so, so for me, I think I was kind of her first convert, but I also was able to see that other people really had the same reaction.
Well, that's great. You got a lot of feedback, I'm sure, from your friends. Sarah, let's just back to this, because I love this home brewing to pro brewer story. It's still inspiring, and it's great for others to learn about, especially now that our friend Julia Hertz is running the American Homebrewer Association. Definitely want to spotlight those of you who really took it from homebrew to pro. Early on, Bitter and Esther's and John, you want to say a few things about his role in the community, because he's really like the last of the homebrew shops, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, of that quality and what he offers, and kind of how, at least for me, again, not seeing myself in this industry before, not seeing people who look like me. It was very hard to go in there and say, I don't know anything, teach me, or here's what I think I know. Am I right or am I wrong? And everybody who works there is very knowledgeable, very approachable. And the way that he has, organized the classes, I believe they've changed since COVID, but when you could go there and do it, it was just so, to me, so easy to digest and allowed for a lot of good explanation at a basic level. And then, hey, here's where you can go learn more. Here's where you can do this. But it wasn't overwhelming. And I mean, from the first one, from like the Brewing 101, I remember I was at a table with a couple of people who had like obviously gotten a Groupon or something. I don't even know. They were just like kind of there to have fun. And I'm sitting there with my notebook, like ready to take notes, writing on the printout of the PowerPoint and everything. So he's always been great, a great resource to talk about stuff, or just, just someone that can help you through and answer questions. And Mike worked there briefly part-time. And so he really got ingrained in that type of thinking and just how to talk to people about beer and manage customers who think they know everything, those who don't know anything, but you can tell they're kind of shy to ask, and then anywhere in between. So he's been amazing.
Just so you know more about me, about 10 years ago, I was gifted one of the intro classes at Bitter and Esther's, and I basically got stuck at sanitation. So I'm more of a short order cook. I never quite could handle fermentation because I usually screw it up. So I have a lot of respect for you. So like, let's go through some of those beer styles and the early successes. Like you like ESB. Let's talk about a beer that might have inspired you, whether it's an English beer or a craft beer. And then the style, because I think the styles are important. And it sounds like it is a great way to learn how to brew.
Yeah. So the first beer that really inspired me was Greenpoint when they were at their old location. They had a milk and honey beer. And that was the first time that I think that's what they called it. That I had heard of like brewing with lactose and things like that. And I was like, why am I enjoying this beer so much? And that's where I came to understand about mouthfeel and all of that. And I was like, oh, that's when it was just like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. I'll never know anything, freaking out that I can't do what I want to do, but just kind of, again, digging into that. What does this mean? What does it mean to brew with lactose? Why is this their beer that they chose? And kind of looking into that style, and not really being able to find something similar to that. And then obviously, like, I love Old Speckled Hen. That's one that luckily there's a store near us now that carries it, but that one's a hard to find. One that's hard to find in the States. I think Bunker Brewing is doing one kind of a nitro style in a can called Chickadee, which is really cool. But that one for me, again, it's about that part of the culture that I feel like beer connects to. Like, you know, you just go have a couple pints. You can get a half pint. Like that blew my mind when I could order a half pint of something. I was like, wait, I don't have to have a whole thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's just that, you know, just thinking about like what all of that had to go through, and then understanding that you can have a low ABV beer and it tastes good. And you can have many of them if you want, or you can just have a few. So it's just kind of the whole culture around that pub culture that I like.
And I think one of the things too, just to chime in on that, because I remember when you were traveling to London a lot and how much your beer drinking changed as a result of that, because, you know, they're very proud of their Maris Otter grain and their malt forward beers. And this was at the same time when New England IPAs were blowing up. And so everyone was so hop crazed, and continues to be obviously so hop crazed in the United States. And I think even before we started brewing, you were just becoming more fascinated, I think, with kind of the maltiness and the fact that there were so many flavors you can get out of the malts. And it doesn't all have to just be, you know, because I was that early, you know, so this is dating Sarah and I both, but you know, when we were first getting into craft beer, that's when sort of Stone and Sierra Nevada and a lot of those West Coast IPAs were really big. And so I loved those super big IBU beers, and Sarah wasn't really into that. And I think seeing that there could be these really delicious beers that were very, you know, malt driven, I think was helpful for you to find that. The other thing I think for both of us was the first time we ever went to Belgium. Those styles really blew our minds, because we, at that point, we were like, oh, okay, we pretty much know kind of the beer landscape. And then you try the Trappist ales, and you have the Saisons, and you have all these other things. And then the yeast from all the Belgian style beers, I think really excited us as well. And, you know, Sarah definitely loves to play with Saisons, and I'll let you speak to that. But I think that's another style that I think really kind of opened up your mind quite a bit in terms of what you can brew and how you can play with that.
Yeah. And of course, you know, having a Belgian beer that has crossed the ocean versus going there and having it on tap in, you know, what are some ridiculous glassware that I absolutely love. And you can still, I think Washington Commons still has one of the serving styles. It's awesome. But, you know, just going there and being like, oh my gosh, this is, what am I tasting? And again, just sitting there and being, you know, people call it like mindfulness now, but just being present of what I'm doing, because I always find just beer in general as a fascinating thing, that we are making something that, you know, physically and chemically changes our brain for a little bit. And it's just like, here, stranger, drink this potion that I made, you know? So it's just like, it's so bizarre to me that we're like, yeah, let's do this.
And now we're friends.
Exactly. And now we're the best of friends. And so going and learning more about the Belgian styles and understanding why those all came to be, I was like, oh, that can be really simple. And it just reminds me a lot of when my grandmother used to talk about, you know, she grew up in Mexico, of kind of their culture of cooking and using the resources around them. And to me, that's the same. I mean, almost every beer style has that story. But for me, the Belgian styles and Saisons really resonated with me.
Oh, that's great. Well, I know you, let's talk about going up to Pittsfield, because you were in Brooklyn and you're opening in Pittsfield. So tell me the plan and, you know, when you're going to open. And, you know, I just posted a really cool reel that you had of some equipment coming in. So it looks really exciting.
Yes, it's exciting and terrifying, all within the same minute. So we had kept our eyes open a little bit for places in the Catskills, because we had just frequented that a lot. Mike has a writing mentor that teaches at Williams here in the Berkshires, and so he'd been coming up a couple times for writing workshops.
You're in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, Western Massachusetts. Okay. Yeah, so we're actually Berkshire County. So Pittsfield is the center of Berkshire County, and Berkshire County is the westernmost part of of Massachusetts, and it actually borders Connecticut, New York, and Vermont. So it's actually a vertically huge county. And we're only about 20 minutes from the New York border, which is nice. So when we kind of were like, oh, let's look here. And of course, thinking about, you know, how to make this harder on ourselves. We're like, sure, why not? Massachusetts, some quite archaic alcohol laws, like there are no happy hours, you can't discount beer, like all these kind of ridiculous things. But the culture spoke to us, and we, Mike can speak to kind of how he became connected to Pittsfield, because he really did the groundwork. I was doing the groundwork of being really involved with the brewers and kind of cold calling the brewers around here to get some, you just like, hey, why are you in the Berkshires? What have you done? What are your consumers like? And Mike kind of did the business side of things, of really helping us find a place and find a community that welcomed us.
Oh, great. So, Mike, let's talk about that because, especially in the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people moved out of New York City, but you still are connected to New York. I almost feel like there's this big area that I'm calling the sixth borough. Tell us about Pittsfield, Massachusetts, because you're really, if sounds like you're right next to New York. It seems like more New Yorkers go there than anyone else.
I think that's true. I think that what I've seen and what I've heard is that Bostonians sometimes come out to the Berkshires, but they also will sometimes go up Maine or to the Cape. So a lot of New Yorkers will escape to the Berkshires just because it is only like a 3-hour drive. And I think our journey actually started a couple years before COVID. Actually, so we were part of that trend of people leaving New York during COVID, but our transition away from New York actually started probably in 2017. The condo that we were living in, which, funnily enough, was across the street from Bierwax, we had a code violation in that building, and the city came and shut off the gas.
Wow.
That's actually how we got the name Hot Plate Brewing Company, was because Sarah was like, no, F this, I'm not giving up on this dream again. I'm going to keep brewing. And so we went out and got a hot plate and kept brewing on a hot plate. And we then, turned that into kind of a symbol of resiliency. But what was happening was we were trying to, we meaning the entire building. So they cut off the gas for the whole building. And I was on the condo board, so I know too much about the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to get working with the DOB and the developer of that building. And it was this nightmare that stretched over the course of 3 years. So the way that we were kind of living from 2017 till COVID hit was we were showering at the gym, and, doing what we could to, get heat from a space heater. And it was just insane the way we were living. And then when COVID hit and they shut down the gyms, we're like, okay, we've got to get out of here. Like this is just completely an unlivable situation. So we knew that it was time to leave, and we started working on a business plan. And we were like, okay, if ever there's a sign from God, like it's time to change your life, it's like probably a global pandemic that happened, once a century. So I started kind of reaching out to different people, and there's an economic development group up here called One Berkshire. And so I just sent them an email, and not knowing much about the area, we just basically looked at the demographics, and Sarah being a researcher by trade, she was able to just kind of pull some basic numbers about like, hey, here's what the average craft beer consumer looks like in terms of their age, their income level, stuff like that. And so I called them, and I'm like, looking at these numbers, it seems like Berkshire County is incredibly underrepresented from a craft beer, or underserved from a craft beer perspective, because there are only 5 breweries in the entire county, and there are, I think, 140 something full-time residents plus all the tourists that come here. And they were like, yes, absolutely, we would love another brewery. So I started talking to them, and they helped put us in touch with a number of people in different towns and different communities. And one of the things that we found was in downtown Pittsfield, there wasn't an urban tap room or brewery that was really matching the kind of concept and vision Sarah and I had in our head. And there was also this story about how General Electric used to have one of their headquarters in Pittsfield. Jack Welch, I believe, was born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And so GE had been there for a very long time. And as the people around here will tell you, they were the biggest employer of the area. And when things were good for them, things were good for Pittsfield. But like much of manufacturing, that fell by the wayside. They shut down. And, for me, that really struck a chord, because my father had worked in manufacturing his whole career. And so that idea of a town that's sort of been left behind when a factory shuttered its operations, like, just, there was an emotional connection that was just beyond business for me. And the kind of funny thing was, in the wake of that, a number of economic development resources have been provided to Pittsfield from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so when we spoke with the mayor and what they call the mayor's red carpet team, so different business development people and other members of the city of Pittsfield, we presented to them our vision for what we wanted the brewery to be and what we were thinking. And so they were able to actually provide us with some economic incentives. So having them kind of champion our cause was great because we're really bootstrapping this whole thing. Like, I wish Sarah and I were made of money. I wish we just came into like, $2 million and just, bankrolled the whole thing ourselves. But having them be, an investor and a supporter of us when we were still just raising friends and family money was the difference between this happening and not. And then once this is a very close knit community. And once people heard that we were coming and once we moved up here, everyone has just been so excited and so supportive to the point where, Sarah and I often, I think, pinch ourselves because we just can't believe that our story is resonating with people and that there is this much excitement for us coming. And so it's really been this great symbiotic thing where we're trying to build something new. The city's looking for some revitalization of their downtown area. And we're all kind of working together to make this happen. So it's, we still have a little bit of a ways to go. We're still a couple months away from opening, but yeah, like you said, the day our equipment came, this started to get real in a way that it hadn't been before. And I think, it's just been kind of a crazy journey for us.
Wow, that's a great intro. Sarah, so could you tell me about, I have a book in front of me that just came out. It's called Drink the Northeast by my friend Carlo DeVito. And I couldn't really figure out if there was anything about Pittsfield in there. What are some of the breweries around you that you checked out while you were,
Sure. Yeah, so I believe there are more than 220 in the entirety of the Commonwealth of Mass, and again, only 5 here. So there's one that will be, actually, there is one in Pittsfield called Wandering Star, and they do, he's British, so, I'm a huge fan of that, obviously. And so he has a ton of experience. He's actually BJCP certified. So he's always helpful in tasting our beers. There is Shire Brew House, which is in Dalton, which is about 15 minutes away. And they are doing some really good things, like really have a ton of different New England IPAs on there. We've gotten to brew with them. They are part of their investors or part of the team, business team, comes from the Crane family. So they have this really cool space in what's called the stationery factory, and all their equipment is custom made, like
Crane stationery.
Yeah, like Crane paper.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. And Andrew Crane kind of started it with the head brewer Nick. They grew up together, so it was just like, yeah, let's do this. And so Nick has done some really fun stuff, and like he was one of the first people I called. I was like, yeah, come join. And it's funny because I've kind of learned this now to always ask, what would you change about your brewery? And he's like, do not get your stuff custom built. And it was just like everything was just short and stout to fit into this basement area, but it's such a cool space. And then to the north, we have Bright Ideas Brewing. They're on the campus of Mass MoCA, and they have been super helpful. They have allowed me to come brew with them. I've done the Pink Boots collab with them. Orion, the owner, he invited us to pour some samples at the Fresh Grass Festival this past weekend, which is a huge music festival on the campus of Mass MoCA. And they've been very helpful of just like, hey, there's been disruptions in grain. Like, how have you changed your ordering? Can you send me a blueprint of where your tanks are located? Because they're kind of similar size. And then there's also Barrington Brewing Company, and they're 2 owners. The brewer trained in England. So again, my heart goes to that. They have these serving tanks, and I was like, oh, living the dream of having serving tanks rather than kegs. So they've been really helpful in kind of showing us their stuff. And then Big Elm, which is down in Sheffield, closer to the Connecticut border. And Christine and Bill, who own that, they actually had a brewery in Pittsfield a number of years ago.
Wow.
Called Pittsfield Brewworks, and they were also running a restaurant at the same time.
Wow.
And they realized, they're like, they didn't want to do the restaurant part. So they moved down and bought a much larger kind of commercial space down in Sheffield. And again, Christine has allowed me to just come join her on a brew day. We canned the other day. It's been really great. And she, again, has answered questions like, how much trash do you produce a week? Just like things to kind of like, tell me more about that yeast.
Wait, so let's go back. These questions, I want to hear all your questions. So I'll ask you the questions. The first one was, what would you change about your brewery? And you said, and the Shire said, don't order custom. Is that what it was?
Yeah. So they're in a very small place because it's in the basement of this stationery factory. And so they have this huge space that also has a restaurant, which I believe they've divested from, but someone has taken that over. And so they have, it basically looks like you took a regular like brew house and just smashed it down. Like everything's just stout.
Yeah, they have a low ceiling, so everything has to be wider than it is tall. So everything had to be kind of designed that way.
So is he saying that everything custom was too expensive? Is that what he was saying?
And I think just, again, the nightmare of, as we've now seen, the nightmare of getting equipment in and being able to change it out and grow it. So they actually have a larger high ceiling garage where they've kind of gotten some larger, I believe 15 and 30 barrel fermenters. So they can kind of expand that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your space. So tell me a little bit about what your space is like, the kind of equipment you're going to start with. I saw some pictures on Instagram, but let's tell our listeners because we're not looking at video.
So we'll be in downtown Pittsfield off of North Street, which is the main street. We're going to be on School Street, so it's right off of North Street, right next to the police station, which some people love, some people hate. I'm totally excited about it. And our capacity tap room, or like people capacity, I believe is like 99. So we'll have a small tap room. We're going to have 12 taps, and we have a 7-barrel brew house with 6 7-barrel uni tanks.
Oh, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah. So fairly simple.
So like just little things. So like particularly about your town and that state, how did they come about giving you 99 person capacity?
I believe that it is based on the square footage. And it's funny, I was just reading something as we're applying for our state liquor license. I was following up on some of those numbers. So it does have to do with, I believe, like the number of exits, the square footage, kind of all that ability to get around and move around.
Yeah, I think it's like 1.5 square feet per person or something. Someone was just telling me that there's like a calculation you do to figure out what the capacity is.
Yeah. So, and we are in the bottom floor of a building that has been totally renovated, but done in a historical conservation way. And there are 6 floors, there's residences above us. So it's kind of that part of that, that we're obviously living in Brooklyn for so long. We're used to like, oh, everybody just lives above all the buildings. And then the brew house, I think it has a capacity of 8, but it actually looks much bigger now with all the tanks and everything. I was very much stressing out while looking at all the blueprints. So.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you guys got started. And we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio. All right.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network for 10 years. Roberta's was founded in Bushwick in 2008 and has become one of the most iconic restaurants in the country. HRN made its home inside of Roberta's in 2009, and together they have become part of the DIY fabric of the neighborhood. Roberta's, the pizza restaurant, is open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week and serves much more than just the famous wood-fired pizzas. Their team dreams up new salads, pastas, and sandwiches on the regular. Roberta's Tiki Bar is alive and well in the back garden, serving up frozen drinks in the summer and hot toddies in the winter. Stop by the bakery and takeout spot next door for fresh breads, sticky buns, and pizzas to go. But Roberta's also extends beyond Bushwick. with multiple locations in New York City and now in Los Angeles. You can also find their frozen pies in grocery stores around the country. The spirit of Roberta's, like Heritage Radio Network, is everywhere. Here's to many more years of pizza-powered radio. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Welcome to heritageradionetwork.org. Become a member and support us. And we're going to have great shows all year round. All right, guys. I can't stop thinking about this show we're doing right now. Hot Plate Brewing, Sarah and Mike moved from Brooklyn to Pittsfield, Mass. And I'm just like fascinated just learning about their journey. She's a great home brewer, and they're very close to opening a licensed brewery in Massachusetts. So, Sarah, let's keep talking. You told me about, the build out and the capacity. So for you choosing to open a brewery, city versus country, what were the factors that led you to want to be in a city rather than just out in the rural areas? Or did you ever think about not being in the city?
Oh, absolutely. Because for me, the dream was like, I'm going to, open up a place that has an outdoor space, a fence where we can just like fence in the children to run around, let
we
them
clearly
be.
don't have children.
Yeah, we clearly don't have children. So I'm like, just keep them there. And just to be able to have a place to have events and things like that, because I love, there's not always warm weather on the East Coast. And so anytime you can sit outside with a beer in decent weather is very exciting to me. But also understanding that going through our drama with our condo and understanding what it takes to replace a boiler, or even there were some buildings we looked at, it's like, oh, there's no sprinkler system. And I'm like, well, that's an entire budget. Like that, we can't, how can we get this decrepit building and build it out? So it was, again, kind of managing our wants versus our needs. And we do not have outdoor space. Unfortunately, we are trying to figure out how we can get maybe a couple tables on the sidewalk during the summer. But it was also for me personally, I'm like, I'm going to basically be living there. We do not have children, but I feel like I'm going to be giving birth soon and have sleepless nights and things. So it really had to be a place that I wanted to go to. And, it wasn't, because if I'm making this life change and I'm creating this job for myself, it's like, well, I have to get up and want to go to work every day. And then looking at places, again, we wanted it to be extremely welcoming. We want it to feel safe. And so when we found this space, it was like, okay, yes, I have to give up on some of the things. And obviously building improvement and overall the cost of just everything has gone up. So we did really try and weigh our pros and cons about each type of space, and thought that for the things that we wanted for ourselves and then what we wanted to provide a community, that this space was the best.
Yeah. And then little things like, well, not little things, but, you mentioned sprinkler systems, sewer and water. I've heard about brewers in more, let's say, not urban areas that have had capacity limits based on their sewers. I know some places, even in like Red Hook, New York, you can only have a certain number of seats based on the city's sewer capacity.
Right.
Did you have to think about things like that?
Luckily, the building that we are in, again, dream scenario, I have my own private bathroom. I have a shower, so I can shower on a brew day. But this place has bathrooms already there that we don't have to take care of. But looking at kind of what the cost of everything would be. So when we were going over our business plan and kind of got some rough numbers about what the cost of water would be, everybody has asked us about that. Like, is this number correct? Because it's ridiculously high, because we are getting an estimate based on water used, but it's not all going down the drain. So that's what's challenging, of really understanding where we can figure out a way to understand how much water we're actually using versus, going out the door as beer versus going down the drain. So as of now, they've done a good job of modernizing the building. So I don't think we'll have any concerns. And we're working with a great team who have been in business for literally hundreds of years. So it's the Allegheny team that we're working with, and they've just been great, and I totally trust them to have done all this due diligence of things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we found was that, it was really a matter of what were the alternatives. And so a lot of the buildings that were in more rural settings, like Sarah was saying, it was just they were older, they required more money, and we are doing this on, it's a number that's like staggering for us, but it's a shoestring budget in the scheme of things, and we just had to make concessions there. And so I think that, plus we were just also worried about if we put something in the middle of nowhere, like, is anyone going to show up? And so having something that was at least, connected to a city, connected to other things, you can build that density that way.
Yeah. Is there a good coffee shop nearby?
There is. It's at the other end of North Street, called Dottie's, and it's great. They have both coffee and good baked goods.
So generally, you like Pittsfield? You feel like it's worth a visit?
We definitely have fallen in love with living here, and there are two things. One is, I think no matter where we were going to end up was going to be better because it was going to have heat, hot water, and a functioning stove. But I think, beyond just our living conditions, what's really great for us is we both actually, in what free time we have, love to go on hikes and spend time outdoors. And one of the things we love about Pittsfield is that you can go downtown and have that kind of urban feel. It's obviously not as congested as what we're all used to, but it has at least like a, sort of Main Street USA type of downtown, but then 5 minutes in any direction, you're on a trail, you're at a lake, and so the access to the outdoors has been great. We're not necessarily theater people ourselves, but there's Barrington Stage Company that's just a couple blocks away from where the brewery is going to be, and they have a lot of Broadway performers who come through, and either something that just came off Broadway, or maybe they're trying to get something onto Broadway, and so they have a lot of stuff there. So and then up in other towns, there are museums and things to do there. So there was a good mix of like culture plus the outdoors. And so it was just a really nice mix there. And the other thing is I love music, and there's just live music everywhere. We're not too far from Tanglewood. And, the musicians we've met in Pittsfield are all extremely talented. And so it's just been kind of a nice mix, a slower pace of life for us as we started getting older, and a place, like Sarah said, if we're creating our own jobs, we can't complain about it. Like when you work for someone else, it's like, okay, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. It's like, if we're making this choice, we have to really want to be there. And when we were looking at different places, this just really jumped out at us as a place that has a lot of the elements that we like. And the other thing that really is exciting for us is because there is this work to revitalize downtown Pittsfield, we can be a part of something to try to make an impact about kind of what the next generation of this is going to be. And that's, Sarah said, we want to serve the community. And, if we went into a more mature market and, okay, great. Like, the thing that we saw that happened, and believe me, this is a good thing, but, from 2012 till now, how many breweries came to Brooklyn? There's so many breweries here, or, in Brooklyn. And so if we were joining a community like that, one more brewery isn't that impactful. Being the only brewery in downtown Pittsfield, it's a different story. We can help shape what that night out now looks like, or that weekend spent here now looks like. And we talk a lot about this with other businesses in the area of just what does this whole experience look like for someone coming from New York? Because one thing that you may not know about, but they started doing this train service that goes directly from Grand Central to Pittsfield.
Wow.
It's called the Berkshire Flyer. And so they did a pilot program that started, I think, right after Memorial Day and ran through the summer. And next year it's going to be a little bit longer, but it's a 2-year pilot program. Amtrak working with both Massachusetts and New York to try to get people back up to the Berkshires. And so next year we're super excited because the train station is literally like a block and a half away from our tap room. And so how do we find a way to not only serve the local community, but when tourists come, there's a great hotel on North Street called Hotel on North, and there are some great restaurants. And it's like, how can we all work together to provide an experience for New Yorkers coming to the area so that when they're done on a hiking trail, they have something to do for the rest of the day, and they have a nice place to stay, and they can go grab a nice meal. And so, it's been really exciting to just even as newcomers, be a part of that conversation.
Wow, congratulations. It sounds like a scene from that classic movie, White Christmas, where everyone arrives on the train in that little town. So you're really onto something. Now I'm grasping this. So, but just back to more topics. We kind of touched on home brewing and entrepreneurship. I know you wanted to talk about Sarah being a Latina, and Latina means woman brewer. Let's talk about that, because it seemed to be in your pitch you did want to talk about that. So,
yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it was hard not seeing myself represented, behind the bar in more than just a beer server or beer tender way. And so that's what kind of, there were a number of things I didn't dive in right away when I graduated college to do this. But that's one of the things that gave me pause. And then it was just, I've always been extremely stubborn. I always, asked why I couldn't play basketball with the boys because they played rougher, and that's how I wanted to play. So there was a period where, I was just like, I guess I do this. I guess I just go get my job. And then after a while, I was like, then I found out about Pink Boots. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole society for women in fermented beverages. And they used to be, now they have like an entry level membership program. But prior to that, you could only join if you had 25% of your income or more from the fermented beverage industry. So I just annoyed them enough and said, can I please come to your meetings? I'll pay $10 or something. And I started going to meetings, and everybody was so welcoming. And it was funny. My first meeting, I talked to the people who do Wild East, and she was like, oh, we're almost signing our lease. Oh my God. And I was like, oh, I'm just an idea right now. I can't wait to be that point. And it's funny because Mike and I were just talking about this yesterday. I'm like, oh my God, I'm at that point now where it's like, yeah. It's like stuff's happening. And so it was very nice because they were all like, hey, you want to look at my books? Ask me a question. And one of the first people I met there was Krista, who you had on the podcast. And so it was great that she came from home brewing as well and just wanted to be part of the industry. And so when she opened up Beer Witch, I was like, hey, I would love to learn that side of the business. And she has just, again, just someone I can ask a question to that's very broad, or, hey, where'd you get your chairs? Like I've emailed Chris as well, or we've texted Chris and be like, how tall is your bar? Because I like that height. That's what I want.
Bierwax and Beer Witch.
Yeah, exactly. And so Krista has, so I worked at Beer Witch for a little bit, and Krista has just become an amazing friend and so supportive. And so,
can I give her a shout out? And you can second me if you want. Krista at Beer Witch, we had her on the show a couple weeks ago. In terms of smarts, knowledge, and her palate, oh my gosh, she really stands out. And I know she's going for the advanced Cicerone, and whether she gets it or not this time, whoa, she is an amazing beer person.
It was always great because we would do so many tastings, and we would just, what she was able to get from it versus what I was able to get from it. And then it was great also that I could bring her my beers and be like, something's off. I can't pinpoint it. Or I don't really like this. Tell me what's wrong. But I have texted her a number of times, been like, I really need your palate up here.
Well, let's talk about your beers. We don't have that much more time, but your beers. Sure. Like, what are you working on making? Your first couple runs. What's going to be on tap in Pittsfield, sure. And then also like someone like Krista at Beer Witch. What's a beer that she gave you, feedback on?
So she was also a fan of my ESB. So I just have to do that again. We did a couple lagers. Obviously, on a homebrew system, a lager takes up a little more capacity than like Mike said, in the 600 square foot apartment. And she enjoyed our lager, which was great. As for what we'll be doing, so our taps. So we'll have 12 taps. It's going to be divided kind of into thirds, not exactly. So the first third is going to be kind of more your classic European style. That's where cream ales are going to live. being next to the police station, we should have a good post-shift lager. And again, as we said, this area, we aren't necessarily competing with big beer, but in a way we kind of are, because, would you rather go get a 30 rack of Bud for $25 or, a pint for $6, $7, $8? Where can you do that? So we want to have more approachable beers on that end. And then we're going to have a section that's kind of whatever's popular right now. So New England IPAs are still very popular up here, but as they are so resource intensive and expensive, we're going to kind of do them our own way. So we still get that the aroma from that. So we've started experimenting with the cryo hops that Yakima is producing. And then the last third is where I like to play. So the chamomile blonde ale, that was the first recipe I ever wrote. We do a jalapeno pale ale that we use local jalapenos. And this year, because we're just home brewing, we actually, I don't know how, but successfully grew the jalapenos we used. So I think it was the one time I was able to bring something from just a little branch to an actual fruit. I don't think I'll try it again. But so then we'll also, one of the things we're going to do is have what we're calling a community line. So understanding how it fits into the production schedule, but we're going to partner with 501c3s. There are a ton of them here, but we're going to invite them to brew with us their beer. We'll work with them on a recipe. And then $1 from each of the pints that we sell will go back to that charity. And then we'll also have like a kickoff bash. So it's, one of the ones we've been talking to is Ales for ALS, which is actually a national one. So we're going to have, again, that's that part of that giving back to the community and being able to have them be a champion of us as well.
That's great. Okay, so while I wait for you guys to open, what am I going to drink? So let's, Mike, you mentioned you might have a beer or two that you didn't make. What are you drinking this week? Because I get a lot of beer in the mail, not as much as beer writers, because I'm on the air, so I'm not counted as a journalist. But I've got the Shoots. They usually send me some good stuff. I've got the Farm Stand Fresh Mango IPA, which is a little different. Well, first, let's say, what do you think about fruit and IPAs? Because I'm still like torn about that.
To me, it's a challenge because, again, as we're trying to understand the cost of ingredients, where they're coming from, are we taking fruit out of something else that could be more beneficial? So it is challenging for me to understand kind of the whole supply chain for that. So we have done it. And I think it depends on, like, can you marry that hop with it? Can you, what's the grain bill? To me, I like a touch of it. I don't necessarily want to be feeling like I'm drinking an orange juice.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. It's challenging. Mike, is there a beer that you're drinking or thinking about today?
So I think the one that I settled, it was sort of a nice happy medium between drinking our own and something that's commercially available. There's the Das Boot collaboration that Sarah actually helped brew on. So Big Elm put this out a couple weeks ago. It's their Fall Fest beer, and it was brewed with Christine from Big Elm, Sarah, and then Liz from 4 Star Farms, which is the only hop grower in Massachusetts. They're based in Northfield. And then someone from Brew Practitioners, which is a brewery in Western Mass as well. And so what was kind of exciting was that 4 different organizations that are female-led came together for this Fall Fest beer collaboration. So been brewing that. Obviously, it's this time of year where having a nice fest beer is kind of our jam. I'm not a big pumpkin beer guy, but I am, in every other respect, a very sort of cliche autumn person. So drinking fest beers and Marzens and Oktoberfest and stuff like that. That's what I'll be doing for the next few weeks.
That's great. Sarah, what are you drinking this week?
I do have to say a lot of the fest beer, but we, at the Fresh Grass Festival that we were at, we met with a brewer from Fort Hill Brewing. I believe they're in kind of central Mass. So we have learned that people who are originally from Massachusetts even consider central Mass to be Western Mass, but that's for a whole nother podcast. And so the head brewer will be opening her own place in Palmer, Mass, called Seven Railroads, and she served me. I believe it was brewed through Fort Hill, but it was actually a lime goza. And again, talking about fruit, what's it going to be? How are we going to do that? But it was very reminiscent of Surfcaster from Oxbow, or surf casting. But again, I'm a huge mouthfeel, and Mike has told me a number of times I can't put lactose in everything. But it was just so smooth and well-rounded, and it was surprisingly refreshing for, again, leaning into fall and fest beers. I was like, oh, I can still have this. This is great. So,
good.
And you're not usually a huge Goza fan, so I
Right.
think that's pretty high praise from you that
Yeah.
you liked it as much as you did.
And then you mentioned two beers from Maine. You mentioned Bunker, their Chicky Nitro, and
Chickadee, yeah.
Chickadee, and you just mentioned Oxbow. Is that just from because you worked at Beer Witch, or?
A little bit of both. I mean, I was born in LA and moved to New Hampshire when I was 8, so I kind of consider myself an East Coaster. So every time, my sister still lives in New Hampshire, so when we would come visit, our goddaughters live in Eastern Mass, and every time we can go somewhere and go to breweries, we do. And when we were first thinking about kind of making the leap, we're like, well, let's go to Portland, because we'd done Portland, Oregon a lot. So we're like, let's go to Portland, Maine. And that's how we found Bunker. And then one of the restaurants we frequent here, they know my love of ESBs. And so it's funny, one day I walked in and they looked at me and they're like, we have a beer for you. And I was like, oh, this is amazing.
So which ESB did they have?
So that was the Chickadee.
Oh, that's Chickadee. Okay, that's great. I love Creston at Bunker, going way back. And then lastly, you mentioned lactose a couple of times. So
Yes.
Are you a fan of brewing with lactose?
I am. I've taken it back a little bit. I understand it has its place. And I believe that that was a hard lesson to learn, because we brewed, so the Capable of Anything, which is a chamomile blonde ale, has lactose. And I used a different lactose in a pinch that I did not order from Bitter and Esters. And so I have learned my lesson. I believe John probably, heard me clicking an online order for elsewhere and cursed the lactose. It did not come out as I wanted. So I'm like, let's take it back. Let's dial it now down a notch and see where I can get what I want from it, playing with the grain bill and playing with the chamomile.
That's great. I'm going to add one Massachusetts question. So, and a woman co-run business is Valley Malt. I know they're in central Western Mass. Have you interacted with them yet, Andrea?
Yeah, so she's, again, one of my cold emails that I was just like, hey, we're opening, tell me about yourself. And she was really excited. She's like, we can definitely deliver. We just got an electric van. We're willing to drive out. I have not met her in person yet, but I have only heard good things about the local breweries around here and the quality of their malt. And we also have Turner Hill Malt, which is extremely small. But they are kind of trying to make the transition to doing larger amounts of malt. And we will not be having a mill, so we have to kind of pay a premium to have pre-milled grain. And so we've been actually working with Turner Hill, and he's going to build a mill. He comes from like an engineering background. So so I'm excited that we can start using some of their stuff as well.
Yeah, that's been one of my, just to give it a plug, craft malt's been one of my favorite things the last couple of years. And I really, especially with a small brewery, I think that it can help you establish, like a New England identity.
Absolutely.
And congrats to you guys. And I'm looking forward to coming out and trying your beer sometime and blessing you on your journey, because I know what it's like to open, and it's going to be exciting. And my only advice is, remember, your friends, they'll help you when you first open, but ultimately you're going to have customers. So,
absolutely.
And your customers will be your best friends. So,
exactly. We're going to have to hustle.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say before we close out? I know you've shouted out to so many people: John at Bitter and Esters, Chris at Beer Witch, Chris and Yahira at Bierwax. Any other shout outs you want to give?
For me, I also want to just shout out Jack and Doug at Bitter and Esters as well. John is kind of the face of the operation, but they also, I think, carry a lot of the lift of making that place run as well as it does. And like Sarah mentioned, I worked there for a short period of time, and their customer service is just, I don't care what industry you're in, they have some of the best customer service in the world. And we talk often about how we try to just mirror what they do there. So we were very fortunate to have them in our lives when we did.
And Sarah, anyone else you want to give a shout out
to? Yeah, I mean, just all the amazing women who are part of Pink Boots. Mary Izette has always been extremely generous with her time out of Fifth Hammer, and just, the crew at Wild East, the crew at Strong Rope. I truly miss their beers, and that's where tasting Strong Rope, I really understood what local grain meant. But it's been the women in the Pink Boots Society that have really been amazing.
And Anne Riley too. I mean, Anne Riley's constantly helping you get connections, even up here. Like she seems to just know everyone.
The New York City's Brewers Guild, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, this was really great. Mike and Sarah, thanks for reaching out. This was really a special show, and you're making me want to visit Pittsfield. I bet next year I'll jump on that Amtrak.
Yeah,
maybe I'll bring Chris Maestro up. That would be fun.
Perfect.
We'll do
great.
Bierwax in the Berkshires. Hey.
Perfect.
That'll be a show. All right. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much,
Mike and Sarah, for joining me on Beer Sessions Radio. Big shout out to Armin Spengen, our engineer, and Alex Tran, our producing intern. I'm Jimmy Carboni, and we'll catch you next time on Heritage Radio Network. All right. Woo! Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.